Hello everyone. I wanted to make a quick and less scripted video to talk about a recent event that I think perfectly illustrates how utterly disinterested in facts and reality transphobes really are. We actually got a pretty good example of this a while back when Matt Walsh claimed that there were hundreds of thousands of kids getting hormone blockers, only to get fact-checked live by Joe Rogan's assistant. That is already a very useful and funny example, but recently there was yet another addition to the ever-increasing list of transphobe L's. I'm talking of course about the recent shooting in Nashville, in which 3 kids along with 3 adults plus the shooter were killed. Now, despite the incessant whinging and whining from conservatives that I've seen on social media, I'm not here to defend the shooter or say that it's the fault of conservatives that the shooting happened, because for one, I don't think acts of violence against random Christians is justified, obviously, and it's not actually even clear what the motivation for the shooting was, as the shooter's manifesto has not yet been released, and the police said that he actually planned on shooting another place before he decided to target the school. At any rate, the shooter's motivation is ultimately irrelevant to the point that I want to make. I've often seen conservative politicians saying not to politicize mass shootings right after they happened and that we should give families the time to grieve and cope with the loss. This time, however, their reaction was very different because the shooter was trans, as I'm sure most of you already know. On the left, we overwhelmingly see the same narrative that I've always seen, people saying to fight the extremist narratives that lead to shootings, and advocating for reasonable gun control laws. While on the right, we see a lot of people implying that violence is something inherent to trans people, or that leftists are at fault for inciting violence against Christians. Besides the obvious hypocrisy coming from people who advocate for the genocide of trans people and always say to not politicize school shootings, the first thing that's worth pointing out is the fact that several analyses by different groups have found that right-wing extremists are far more likely to commit violence, and that Republicans are much more likely than Democrats to support political violence. Furthermore, of the almost 3,000 mass shootings that have happened since 2018, only 3 involved a trans person, and when we consider that trans people are about 0.6% of the general population, this means that the per capita prevalence of mass shooters among cis people is about 5.7 times that of trans people. The far right loves to whine about their 1350s, but seem to conveniently ignore this disproportionate amount of cis shooters. Of course, I'm not here to say that cis people are inherently more violent than trans people, or that we only need to worry about trans shooters once there are 6 times as many of them. All I want to point out is that despite the rhetoric coming from the right saying that trans people are violent or that leftists are justifying more violence against Christians, the reality is that the number of trans shooters are an incredibly small minority of trans people, and that per capita, leftists and trans people specifically are far less likely to be violent compared to right-wingers. There is a complete disconnect between the rhetoric coming from the right and the actual data on this fact. Now, because I'm a sucker for suffering, I like to annoy right-wingers every now and then, I made a meme about this and posted it to the Political Compass Memes subreddit, because I love to poke the hornet's nest that is that right-wing hellhole. When I pointed out in the comments that trans people are less likely to be shooters, another user mentioned a report that supposedly proved that trans people are substantially more likely to be shooters. Of course, if we know anything about right-wingers and reading, this is complete BS. Despite said user claiming that this estimate didn't include gang violence, the methodology described in the report actually included shootings regardless of motivation. So it turns out that right-wingers still have a habit of not actually reading what they're linking to. Furthermore, the report actually used a really restricted definition of shooting. They only included shootings in which 4 or more people died, excluding the shooter. A lot of shootings can end without deaths or with less than 4 deaths, but a lot more people injured. This is why the aforementioned estimate of shootings since 2018 actually reports that there were a lot more mass shootings. I'll also add that, although I've seen some people say that there were actually 4 trans shooters, the supposed 4th trans shooter is actually the Club Q shooter, who only said he identified as non-binary after the shooting, with friends and family saying that he never identified as non-binary before the shooting. It's a pretty clear case of a right-wing troll just trying to use a trans identity to possibly escape hate crime charges and to feed into far-right rhetoric. All this goes to show that for people who claim to care so much about the science of sex and biology, they sure seem disinterested in the actual facts regarding the number of shooters. They just want to continue feeding this violent and genocidal rhetoric, which leads to trans people being actually far more likely to be victims of violence. that trans people are just violent men who are putting on dresses to look at women in the bathroom and rape them, that trans people are all mentally ill and that they're a danger to others. They don't care about facts, they don't care about violence. Many of them actually think it's justified because they're so afraid of what they don't understand. And what this shooting illustrates once again is that conservatives don't seem to understand a lot of things. So that's it for this video. I'll link to all the sources in the description, of course, so you can also destroy some conservatives with facts and logic if you want to. And I'm still going to post the stuff I talked about in my previous videos. So here's a list of what I plan on making in the future. If any of these sound interesting at all, consider subscribing. Take care and stay safe from these ghouls out there.